I enjoyed that very much. And where's Pastor Nate? I saw him earlier. Is he out there? Pastor Nate? I didn't recognize you when I came in. You changed your looks with your new job. And I'm sorry I didn't recognize you, but it's good to see you again. It's good to be here with you, to worship with you, to praise God together. I want you to take your Bibles, and the first place I want you to turn to is Matthew chapter 5. The Beatitudes that we all know so well. Matthew chapter 5 and verse 9. Blessed are the peacemakers, for they shall be called the sons of God. I need to get this clicker out of my pocket. If it's still on automatic, it's going to be a very short sermon. So let's see if we have... Oh yes, the word search today. I'm going to change it. It says in the bulletin that you're looking for the word conflict, and I want to change that to the word greatest. You'll find that word much more frequently than the word conflict. So change it to the word greatest, and you'll have plenty of times to mark that down. And I want you to know that I want to know how many times I use the word, because I don't know. So you tell me after we're through, I'd appreciate that. Our ministry is a very unique in British Columbia. We organized a ministry called Adventist Reconciliation Services. We did it through the North Pacific Union, and then a few years later we took it to an independent status because in conflict resolution, neutrality is everything. And as long as I was an employee of the church, I was not seen to be neutral by others, so we took our ministry into an independent professional service, and we've been doing that ever since 2002. Until this January, just a little over 2 months ago, just 2 months ago now, we started a brand new ministry called the Institute for Biblical Peacemakers. And it's doing everything that Adventist Reconciliation Services does, or did, plus more. Because we are going in the internet, and we are holding seminars, teaching and training people to peacemakers over the internet. That means any one of you can take advantage of that. I'm going to move forward here. All right.
Not yet.
Not yet. I can't move forward just yet.
Not just yet.
Okay. I thought I had a couple of new slides in there.
It was on automatic. We're fixing it.
Oh, I see. All right. I want to tell you about a course in biblical peacemaking that you can take online. It's called Responding to Conflict Biblically. We just read in Matthew chapter 5, blessed are the peacemakers, for they shall be called the sons of God. Now, I've got a very unique name, and Sandy, bless your heart, you were kind to me in introducing me as Charlie Brown. I get that all the time. But there's one name that I would rather be introduced by than any other name, and it comes from Matthew chapter 5 and verse 8. Blessed are the peacemakers, for they shall be called the sons of God. I'm often introduced as a peacemaker because that's my ministry. But I would love to be introduced as a child of God, wouldn't you? Now, if you look at that verse carefully, you'll see it's virtually an equation. If you are a peacemaker, you are a child of God. Dare you call yourself a child of God if you are not a peacemaker? A little harder to turn it around and say it that way, but I believe that's what the Lord would want us to understand. If we're a child of God, we're automatically a peacemaker. And it behooves us to study as much as we can to learn how to bring peace into the lives of our own circle of friends and family, and also those that are about us. So I hope today, as we take a look at another chapter in Matthew, we can learn a few things about that. Matthew chapter 18 is the passage we're going to study. We're going to stay right there throughout the entire chapter. And you won't have to look any further. So, can we back up further? And are we? I appreciate Diane putting the Whitewater picture on the front of the page because we're going to be in Whitewater for sure. Are we ready? Can I use the clicker now? All right. It was a Sabbath afternoon years ago when Marjorie and I were in British Columbia, and we went for a drive on Sabbath afternoon up in the mountains. Our picture disappeared, so we'll get it back on there. Now it's gone into, it needs to be on play mode.
No. It's auto advancing and trying.
It's still auto advancing.
Yeah. Just go ahead and preach.
But Doug, I don't know how to preach without my pictures. All right, well, let me know when it's usable. Sabbath afternoon, we were in the mountains in just above the Fraser Valley in British Columbia. And we had seen a lot of beautiful country, a lot of wildlife, but not too much of anything else of interest. And as we came down along the Chilliwack River, we saw a great big long line of cars, automobiles, pickups, and it was very unusual. We were on a Forest Service road, and that just doesn't happen out there in the mountains. Then we saw an ambulance or two. I slowed down and rolled the windows down, and then we heard a great roar of people coming from nearby. It seemed like it was coming from down by the river. Well, our curiosity got the best of us, so we had to stop and see what was going on. So we stopped, got out, and looked down on the Chilliwack River. And there we got our first introduction to whitewater kayaking competition. And never seen it before. It is an international sport. It's part of the Winter Olympics, or Summer Olympics probably. And this was the Canadian National Finals. And I have pictures there to illustrate exactly how that works. Are we ready to try it again? That's the right picture to start with. All right, that's the next picture. The kayaker will start at a river, up at a starting gate, and they have stretched cables across the river and then hung pylons. The black and white stick that you see hangs from a pylon, and that's their starting gate. As they go down the course, they negotiate through gates that are hanging above the river, just like a slalom snow skier snows through gates that are planted in the snow. And of course, the objective is to go through the gates properly in the fastest time possible. Well, we watched as a whitewater rafter got started there and came down, negotiated several gates, and everybody was clapping and applauding. And then all of a sudden, there was a huge roar. Oh, no! They missed the gate. And what happened at that time is what I want to talk about this morning. That kayaker had to make an instantaneous decision. The choice was, do I go ahead and go on through the course, having missed a gate, and take a 5 or 10 second penalty, whatever the penalty was, or do I stop, reverse my course, and go back up the river to the gate and go back through the proper way? I would not have thought it was possible to paddle a kayak up that kind of whitewater, but they did it. The kayaker negotiated over against the edge of the river, and there's a little quiet little eddy below a rock, and then all of a sudden, with a great thrust, he went around the rock to where it was quiet again and did that several times until he got above the gate. And then he went back down the proper way, and when he went the proper way, everybody roared their applause and approval. That was whitewater kayaking international competition. And as I thought about that, I thought that is so much like life. We go through life at a breakneck speed, just as fast as possible, faster than we would like at times, I'm sure. And we make a split-second decision, and then we discover it was wrong. We have to make a choice. Are we going to stop? Are we going to go back and do things right? Or are we going to go on and ignore it? I call those moments the oopses of life. Isn't that a good technical term? Oops. I can't believe I said that. Ever have one like that? Oops, I can't believe I actually did that. Yeah, those are the oopses of life. And that's when we have to make a decision. Are we going to go on through life at a breakneck speed, like the kayaker, or are we going to say, God, I've got to stop. I've got to back up. Help me to go back to that point, start over again, and do life correctly. In Matthew chapter 18, Jesus is teaching us how to handle the rapids of life, how to negotiate the rapids of life. And he starts out with an interesting question that we don't know which of the disciples asked the question. But he says, one of the disciples came to him and saying, Jesus, who then is the greatest in the kingdom of heaven? You remember that discussion? It's a common story. We don't know if it was Peter, James, John, whoever. But now I'm thankful that whoever asked that question did have an eternal view in mind. I mean, we're talking about the kingdom of heaven. But somehow there was still some of that earthly competition in the question. Who's going to be the greatest, Lord? Which one of us is it? Would you tell us who is the greatest disciple? That's all inferred there, isn't it? I don't know who asked the question. I don't know what they expected to hear back. They were probably hoping, well, of course, it's you. They were hoping Jesus would say. But they were not expecting, I can almost guarantee you, they were not expecting the answer that they got. Because in verse 2, let's look at verse 2, Matthew 18, Jesus called a little child to him, set him in the midst of them, and he said, assuredly I say unto you, unless you are converted and become as a little child, as little children, you will by no means enter the kingdom of heaven. I have to remember to keep up with my clicker here. Why a little child, Jesus? What is there about children that Jesus would want you to emulate if you're going to be the greatest in the kingdom of heaven? Now, I want you to notice very carefully. Jesus did not say that we ought to be childish. There are too many adults today that have never grown up in all aspects of life, and they're still acting childish. That's not what Jesus was talking about. He was talking about childlike qualities, and he's going to go on and explain that a little bit more. Therefore, whoever humbles himself as the little child is the greatest in the kingdom of heaven. Whoever humbles himself as a child is the greatest in the kingdom of heaven. Jesus gave a short answer, and he's going to give a longer answer a little bit later as he goes further. Why isn't this moving? Try this once more. There it is. He says, first of all, we must be converted. And then he says, well, Doug, what's happening here? And then he must be humble as a little child. We do not often equate humility with greatness. At least the world doesn't often equate humility with greatness. What did he mean? He certainly wasn't recommending that we become childish. So what is this childlike quality, specifically perhaps about humility, that he wants us to know about? Then Jesus gives a longer answer. I call that the short answer, and here comes the longest answer. Now, if you have teenagers in your life at any point in time, you know about the business of short answers and long answers. It works something like this. Junior comes home from school on a Friday, and he says, Dad, Joe and I would like to take a trip up to the hills. Joe said we can take his car, and we can do this, we can go blah, 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 and he explained blah, blah, blah. Can I go? Dad doesn't take very long, and he says, no. Because he knows what two teenage boys with a car might be doing in the mountains or elsewhere. But Dad, can I do blah, 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 blah? And Dad says, I said no. Answer. But Junior knows that there is an automatic court of appeals in the household. Yeah, that's Mom. So he goes to Mom. Mom, Joe invited me to go to the mountains with him. We can take his car. We can go blah, blah, blah. We can do blah, blah, blah. Can I go? And Mom says, no. Well, I think she probably said, did you ask your dad? What did he say? No. Well, and then Mom gives a longer answer because she knows what might happen if two boys in a car go out to the mountains for the weekend by themselves, et cetera, et cetera. And she gives about 10 reasons why the answer is no. And finally, Junior says, okay, Mom, I get the point. I'll tell Tom I can't go. So that's the long answer. Now here we have in Matthew chapter 18, the long answer that Jesus gives to explain what is involved in being childlike. Jesus answering the question, remember, about who's going to be the greatest. So let's look at verses, starting with verse 6 of chapter 18. See if we can have the right verses here. Okay, verse 6. Whoever receives the little child in verse 5 like this in my name receives me. And then he warns of offenses. But whoever causes one of these little ones who believe in me to sin, it would be better for him if a millstone was hung around his neck and if he were drowned in the depths of the sea. That's pretty strong language, isn't it? I want you to notice what Jesus is saying. He's saying, for one thing, offenses will come. Life happens. People are hurt. People are mean. Innocent people are damaged and wounded. So he says, in this mad race of life, there will be offenses that happen. But he says, be sure you are not the one creating or causing the offense. And he says, woe to the world because of these offenses. Offenses must come, but woe to that man by whom the offense comes. And then he gives the prescription for the offense. He says, if your hand and foot causes you to sin, cut it off. Cast it from you. It's better for you to enter into life lame or maimed rather than having 2 hands and 2 feet to be cast into everlasting fire. Okay, folks, Seventh-day Adventist, take the word literally, right? So let's see. Let me see your hands. Raise your hand, both of them. It's amazing that we all seem to have 2 hands. Are you saying we have never offended anybody by our actions? I won't ask you to show us your feet. What does Jesus mean here? How do we take this? It must not be literal, but how do we know? I think there's a very simple reason why we know that it was not literal. Jesus' disciples lived with him. They were with him constantly. They sinned in his presence, and they all had 2 hands and 2 feet. So what was Jesus saying? No, he wasn't saying cut it off, not cutting off the hands or the feet. He was saying we need to be sure we are not the one creating the offense. There's a phrase that I have used in the last number of years as I taught peacemaking. I have noticed that within the church, there are people who use all kinds of tactics to further what they consider to be the cause of God. I call it doing God's work like the devil. Oh, they pretend to be doing God's work, but they're not using the right methods, the right techniques. They're using intimidation. They're using coercion. They're using belittling words. They're using spiritual abuse. You've seen that in your lifetime probably. People that pretend to be doing the cause of God, but they're doing it in terrible ways and offending people right and left along the way. This is what Jesus is talking about. Jesus is giving counsel on what to do if we are offending or hurting people. So, I think he's saying, brother and sister businessman, if you are more concerned about your bottom line than you are about honesty and fairness, then stop it. Act like a Christian business person should. Perhaps he's saying to Christian leaders, if you're using the worldly tactics to lead God's people, put them aside and use example leadership and be inspiration to those who you are leading. Perhaps he's saying, Christian parents, if you're belittling your little children and trying to coerce them and force them into being Christians, even Seventh-day Adventist Christians, then change your approach. Stop it. Lead by example. Encourage them in a positive way. And I think to all of us, he would say, if your tongue is gossiping, if it's lying, cut it out. Well, not your tongue, of course. Cut out the gossip, cut out the lying. We call this the process of sanctification, don't we? Learn to be more Christ-like. Stop the behavior that is offending people. That's the first part of Jesus' answer. The one who is greatest is the one who is not offending fellow believers. Let's take a look at the second part of the answer. There we are. All right. This has to do with Jesus' story about the lost sheep. Now, probably 99% of you could tell me this story almost word for word. It's so familiar. But I want you to know that it's not about sheep. Oh, yes, you say it is. There were 99 of them. One was gone, and the shepherd went out. No, it's not about sheep. It's a parable. It's about people. So what is it that Jesus was saying about people? Do we need to review the story about how valuable that sheep was? That the shepherd was willing to risk his life to save the life of the sheep going out in the night because just one was missing. He still had 99. He could have survived in the business of sheep herding, being a shepherd with 99 sheep. But it wasn't about sheep, remember? It's about the value of the individual soul. So the second part of Jesus' answer is the one who is really the greatest in the kingdom of heaven is the one who sees God's people of equal value. In the sight of God, we're all of equal value. He's saying that every soul on the face of the earth is worth the price the Good Shepherd paid for his sheep. Little children are the most inclusive human beings on the face of the earth, I think. They don't see color on the skin. They don't distinguish carefully about languages. They just like people. I remember a story I heard many, many years ago about a mother who was at home with her preschool daughter. The little girl was anxious to go outside and play, and mother got her dressed up to go outside and sent her out to the street to play with other neighborhood children. This was in the days when it was safe to have children go out and play together. And it wasn't very long until the little girl came back into the house, and to mother's horror, she was stark naked. And she said, "Sweetheart, what are you doing?" "Playing with the other boys and girls." "Well, do they all are they boys or are they girls? Are they little boys and little girls?" She said, "Mommy, I can't tell. They don't have any clothes on." Children don't understand gender in those early years. They don't understand color of the skin. They don't understand Chinese or English and those differences. It doesn't matter to them if the child's father is a president of the United States or if he's a prisoner. Children are totally inclusive, aren't they? They learn those prejudices from us, and how quickly they learn, how they learn to follow our example of prejudice. No, every child of God is of inestimable value. That's what Jesus was saying. That's why he died for every single one of us. I wish I couldn't tell you this next story, but I can because it happened. I saw it happen. It was a brand new church, not more than 1,000 miles away from here. Brand new church. And they had just had their opening services a few weeks before. And you know how the attendance picks up when a new church building is built. People come just out of the woodwork to see what the new church is like. They've watched it go up. They want to see the inside. And that's what was happening. They had a lot of newcomers in the new church. It was a rainy winter day, like we have too often in Oregon. And as people were coming in on Sabbath morning, a stranger walked in off the street. It wasn't just any stranger. This stranger was notably different. He looked like a man off the street. He looked like a homeless person, whatever that is. And he had a backpack. He was not dressed in suit and tie. And he was soaking wet. He came in the foyer, and he dropped his backpack off by the side of the wall and was looking around to see where to go when one of the deacons came by. He tapped the young man on the shoulder. The young man turned to him. He said, "Young man, I don't know what you think you're doing here, but this church isn't for just anybody, you understand." I was hoping I'd get that reaction. Yes. Oh. The young man got the point. He picked up his backpack and he disappeared. Is this church built for just anybody? Yes, that's why it was built. And when we look at the threshold of the door of this church, you'll notice there is no threshold. It's level, perfectly level, and that's the way it ought to be. Anybody should be welcome. It should be easy for people to come to this church or any other church because everybody is equal in the sight of God. The question is, do we always treat them that way? I fear perhaps not so always. Let's take a look at the third part of Jesus' answer. The third part. Let's look at Matthew chapter 18, verses 15 to 20. This is a very familiar verse. We're not going to dwell on it much. You've heard it many times. Moreover, if your brother or sister sin against you, go and tell them a fault between you and him alone. If he hears you, you have gained your brother. You know the instruction as well as I do, probably. If they won't listen to you, then take somebody else with you. And if they won't listen to them, then take it to the church. I call this the principle of ascending involvement. When we're trying to reconcile with people, the Lord instructs us to try to do it with the lowest level involvement possible. Do it one-on-one. First of all, we can forgive and just ignore it, overlook it. We don't have to challenge everything. Some things aren't worth fighting over, are they? I think not. But if we can't overlook it, and if we can't just forgive, then we need to talk one-on-one. And if that doesn't work, we can take somebody else with us. If that doesn't work, then we can take somebody to help involve others in resolving the conflict. So the third instruction that Jesus gave us in this chapter is the one who is greatest is the one who follows Jesus' counsel on resolving conflict. I've been teaching that for over 20 years now, and I will continue teaching it until the Lord lays me to rest and he comes and puts an end to things. It's so easy to read, but so difficult to do. Jesus never said it would be easy. Jesus never said it would always resolve things either. We do it because he said to do it. And I've noticed if we follow his counsel, we are much more likely to resolve issues than if we don't follow his example. I was teaching a seminar in one of our churches, happened to be here in Oregon. And we had a morning session, an afternoon session, and during lunch, I was having lunch at a potluck sitting with the head elder. And he said, Charlie, can I ask you a question? I've got a problem at work with a fellow employee, and I'm just wondering what my next move needs to be. He told me the story. And I said, have you talked to him personally? Well, no. And I said, well, if I understand Matthew 18, your next move ought to be to talk to him individually, personally, about the issue. And I watched as the color rose in his neck. He literally began to shake. He said, Charlie Brown, I tried following Matthew 18 once. It blew up in my face. I will never follow Matthew 18 again. And I thought, wow. No wonder the church is struggling if the head elder doesn't have an understanding of Matthew 18 and willingness to follow it. But what happened Sabbath afternoon was encouraging. As we studied further on how to approach someone, he asked if he could tell the story of our conversation. I said, sure, it's your story. And he told exactly how he had reacted to my counsel and to the counsel of Matthew 18. And then he said, folks, I want you to know, I just thought I was following Matthew 18. But I didn't go with the right spirit. I didn't go with a forgiving heart. I didn't even go with an open heart to understand where he was coming from or why. He said, now, I think if I had done that in the way we have just learned, things would have been different. So it is true that we may have to study and be careful about how we approach things and about how we and when we involve others, and we'll be much more successful. So the first step we can do is to overlook an offense. The second step is to go talk privately. The third step is to take some with us. And then finally, every element of society has a final authority that we can go to, whether it's the church board, business meeting, whether it's the parents in the home, the principal at the school. Ultimately, there is someone who will help resolve it if we don't settle it before then. So that's the third part of Jesus' long answer. Let's take a look finally in the fourth part of Jesus' long answer. Try this once more. There we go. All right. This is a very, very familiar story again. It's the parable of the unforgiving servant. And I think that you also could tell me this story almost word for word. We're not going to read it word for word, but we'll read parts of it. In verse 23, Jesus said, "Therefore the kingdom of heaven is like a certain king who wanted to settle accounts with his servants. And when he had begun to settle accounts, one was brought to him who owed him 10,000 talents. And your mind is like mine is saying, how much is 10,000 talents? We'll get to that. Just hold on to that. But he was not able to pay. His master commanded that he be sold and his wife and children, all that he had, and said the payment to be made. The servant fell down before him, saying, Master, have patience with me, and I will pay you all. Remember that phrase. It's telling. Then the master of the servant was moved with compassion. He released him and forgave him the debt. Just forgave it. Now you remember what happened? He went out, found one of his fellow servants who owed him 100 denarii. And he laid hands on him, took him by the throat, and said, Pay me what you owe. Cough it up, man. I need it. So his fellow servant fell down at his feet, begged him, saying, Have patience with me. I will pay you all. Same phrase. But he would not, and he threw him into the prison until he should pay the debt. Now, how he was going to pay the debt from prison is a question that we probably all would ask. But let's go back now and talk about this debt that the man had. How much is 10,000 talents? Before I tell you how much 10,000 talents was, let's talk about the smaller debt. It's easier to equate. A denarii. A denarius was equal to a day's wage. So the second man owed the unforgiving man 100 denarii, approximately 5 months of wages. That's a significant debt. You probably would think twice before you commit yourself to a debt equal to 5 months of your wages. But it's payable, isn't it, for most people? If you're on a salary, you can pay it off. Take a little bit of time, perhaps, but you would honor your debt and you would pay it. So what about the 10,000 talent debt? Well, 10,000 anything is a lot of anything. Let's face it. 10,000 cattle is a big herd. 10,000 cars on the freeway is a traffic jam. 10,000 of anything is a lot of anything. I failed to pick up some pennies off my desk or my nightstand that I was going to bring. 16 pennies stacked up produce 1 inch of pennies. How much would 10,000 pennies be in height? Now, I suppose if you saw a penny on the sidewalk, you probably wouldn't even stop to pick it up. It costs more to produce a penny now than the penny is worth. Did you know that? The last figure I saw was 1.7 cents to make a penny worth 1 penny. The government has even considered not producing them. They don't do it in Canada anymore. A nickel is the lowest denomination in Canadian currency. If I gave you a penny, you wouldn't be interested. If I gave you 10,000 pennies, probably be interested. That's $100. 55 pounds of pennies in $100. So that's probably worth toting home and hoping you can find somebody who'd convert it into larger denominations. So if the talent equaled a day's wage, and you had 10,000 days of wages of debt, that would be 40 years of wages. Now we're talking a lifetime debt, aren't we? That's even a larger mortgage than most of us would be comfortable here, even if they offered it. All right, so if the talent was equal to the value of a denarii, it by itself would be 40 years of debt, wages. But it isn't. There's something wrong with that slide, but I'll tell you what it says. The talent equaled 6,000 denarii, not one. See, the talent was equal to 6,000 denarii, and if you add that up, that comes to 60 million days of wages, And if your figuring is beyond what you're able to do, I'll tell you what that's supposed to say. 240,000 years of labor. That's 10,000 talents. And here's a man that says, have patience with me, I will pay you how much? All. What a stupid man. Now, I cannot believe that he didn't understand the value of the talent. He was just ignorant about being able to pay it. And he was asking to be forgiven. And of course, he was forgiven. That's the beauty of it. But we need to remember again that this was not an actual story of life circumstance, probably. It was a parable. It was meant to teach a principle. The principle is obviously that the man owed an impossible debt. A debt that was impossible to pay. 5 months of wages, sure. We wouldn't like it, but we could pay it. But it is possible to pay 5 months of wages. He's saying we ought to be willing to forgive even when the debt is beyond what we are comfortable with. 2 little children playing in a sandbox. And if you watch them long enough, you might see them engaged in a squabble. That's my bucket. That's my shovel. No, it's mine. And you can watch, but if you watch long enough, you would likely see those 2 little children make up and go on continue playing quietly. Children are very willing and easy to forgive one another. That's what Jesus was talking about when he said we need to be childlike. We need to be willing to forgive. Willing and able to forgive. So, let's review as we come to the close. Jesus' long answer about who is the greatest in the kingdom of heaven. The one who is always willing to forgive, it says here. Let's summarize by saying the first one was the one who does not intentionally offend another person. The second one is the one who sees everyone of equal value. The third one is the one who uses Jesus' plan for reconciliation, from Matthew 18. And then finally, the one who's always willing and ready to forgive, as Jesus was willing and ready to forgive us our impossible debt. We are the ones owing 10,000 talent worth of debt because of our sins. And yet he's willing to forgive us just as freely. Should we not be just as willing to forgive others when they offend us? I trust that we would. We sing our closing hymn. I think there's someone ready to lead us in a hymn. Good. Oh, the children are going to come up. Very good. I'd like to take you children on the road with me when I preach somewhere else. I enjoy your singing.